Hello and welcome to Owning the Narrative. I am Bulow. The show will feature the top news of the week, complete with my observations, and even a little bit of sarcasm thrown in. The top news stories will be taken from my morning news briefings that I write on the Rick Bulow New Media blog every weekday morning. If you go on to like what you see, smash that thumbs up button. And now, let's go right into the news. With With the election just inside of 49 days or 7 weeks, things are shaping up, especially in the financial aspect. This from legalinsurrection.com and William Jacobson, who wrote an article entitled "Mike Bloomberg Wants to Buy a Florida Election for Joe Biden for $100 million." And it says Bloomberg opening his wallet in Florida is a sign that Joe Biden is in big trouble in the state. The spending will focus mostly on television and digital ads in both English and Spanish. You remember Mini Mike? He sank $1 billion into his Democrat presidential run, but collapsed on the debate stage after Elizabeth Warren ripped him a new one over. Well, who even remembers what it was over, but it was brutal. Of course, Bloomberg could afford to blow $1 billion, just a couple of percentage points of his net worth back then, but it showed that money can't buy you voter love unless the product you're selling is attractive. Bloomberg has also promised to spend a fortune to elect Biden, but so far it hasn't materialized. Bloomberg has pledged at least $60 million for House races. Perhaps given the polling, Bloomberg felt his megabucks were needed. However, things have changed in the past couple weeks. Trump is making tremendous headway in Florida, particularly with the Hispanic population, and the polls have Biden slightly ahead. So if the polls are dead close to, so if the polls are dead even or close to that, it means Trump is ahead, and that means Democrats are worried. Democrats are worried that the Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden's lagging support among Latino voters could put him at risk of losing Florida and even the White House in November. Recent polls out of Florida show the former vice president's support among Latinos, trailing Hillary Clinton's in 2016, fueling concerns that he could lose a pivotal swing state. There's really no good answer here if you're the Biden campaign, said one Florida Democrat operative said. At this stage in the campaign, you should not be getting those numbers against the most anti-Hispanic president in history. So Bloomberg is coming off the sideline and promising to throw $100 million to help Biden in Florida. WAPO reports former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg plans to spend at least $100 million in Florida to help elect Democrat Joe Biden, a massive late-stage infusion of cash that could reshape the presidential contest in a costly toss-up state central to President Trump's re-election hopes. Now, voting starts on September 24th in Florida, so the need to inject real capital in that state quickly is an urgent need, said Bloomberg advisor Kevin Sheekey. Mike believes that by investing in Florida, it will allow campaign resources and other Democrat resources to be used in other states, in particular the state of Pennsylvania. In recent weeks, polls in Florida have narrowed, with the Cook political reports recently shifting the state from lean Democrat to toss-up. A Washington Post average of public polls since August finds Biden up by 1 percentage point in the state, well within the margin of error. Now, while he's been doing better than past Democrat candidates with whites and seniors, Biden has struggled among the state's Latino population, which Republicans have focused in enormous resources on courting over several election cycles. If you have the ability to make sure you are able to speak directly to all of those different communities and where they live, then you are going a long way to securing the states for Biden in this election, Republican Ted Deutsch, Democrat Florida, said. I'm glad that Mike Bloomberg recognizes and is prepared to make an investment to make sure that every one of those communities will be aware of the importance of this election. The spending will focus mostly on television and digital ads in both English and Spanish. Bloomberg's aim is to prompt enough early voting that a pro-Biden result would be evident soon after the polls close. Now, Florida, unlike other swing states, reports almost all early ballots shortly after voting ends. Trump responded on Twitter, "I thought Millie Make was through with Democrat politics after spending almost $2 billion and then giving the worst and most inept debate performance in the history of presidential politics." Pocahontas ended his political career on first question. Over, save New York City instead. Now, Trump supporters should take Bloomberg's large wallet seriously, but also should find good news in the decision because it means Democrats' internal polling and analysis shows Biden in big trouble in Florida. Now, I live in Florida, and I gotta tell you, the key to winning Florida is the I-4 corridor, which is from Tampa northeast to Daytona, cutting through Orlando. How that state goes, or how that area goes, so goes the state of Florida. And with early voting beginning in 10 days, and we're just inside 49 days until the election. I keep saying it. I said before, and I'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it until November 3rd. Things are bound to get interesting, and I'll be here to let everyone, and I'll be here to keep everyone up to date, and possibly even give my own prediction as soon as we get the early ballot. With 2 weeks until the first presidential debate and 7 weeks until the election, we have the Commission on Presidential Debates, which was created in 1987, standing in the way of Trump and Biden. Let's go right into the article. Written by Ed Rollins and posted on Real Clear Politics. Debates Commission is part of the Washington swamp. It's time to debate. After months of political posturing, Americans deserve to see President Trump and Joe Biden come face to face, expanding their policy platforms and outlining their visions for the future. But the Commission on Presidential Debates stands in the way. Created in 1987 with noble intentions, CPD's purpose was to ensure that presidential election debates remain a part of the electoral process. However, as so happens in Washington, D.C., the nonprofit organization has morphed into something quite different today. CPD is now an entrenched part of the Washington swamp, leveraging its bureaucratic presence to exert undue influence over presidential elections. Now, originally, CPD was set up and staffed under the Republican and Democrat Party committees, with the two party chairs being the CPD co-chairs. As party leaders, they would work closely with the campaigns. In the 33 years since its founding, the original Republican has not relinquished his role, even though the party itself has had 14 chairs since then, and none have served on the debate commission as intended. The same is true of the DNC chairs, who have not played their intended role. Last month, CPD rejected the Trump campaign's request to modify the presidential debate schedule so that the first debate could occur before states begin early voting. Certainly a reasonable request. Moving up the timeline would make sure that all Americans could see the candidates square up before the first ballots were cast. Alas, CPD nixed the idea for no apparent reason. Notably, the Biden campaign remained silent, determined to stay out of the public spotlight for as long as possible, whereas President Trump is eager to take down his Democrat opponent, even supporting an additional debate hosted by Joe Rogan. Biden is anything but enthusiastic. For months now, he has employed a quote-unquote bunker strategy to duck questions and cut down on his now infamous gas. A presidential debate would force Biden out of hiding, which he and his staffers are determined to push off for as long as possible. Of course, the true losers are the early voters who cannot see the Democrat nominee come out of his shell before their votes are determined. Therein lies the true failure of the Commission on Presidential Debates. CPD's bureaucrats could have expedited the first debate for the greater good, forcing Biden to confront the voters who demand his presence. In line with its mission statement, CPD could have, quote unquote, improved the quality of debates by introducing the first debate as a barometer for early voters. It is now clear that CPD has outlived its purpose. Determining presidential debates, including their format, timing, and location, should be a negotiation between the two campaigns and the news outlets that will broadcast them. CPD is a needless additional party at this point, and one with an apparent anti-Trump bias. CPD's co-chairs publicly criticized the Trump campaign for daring to suggest an earlier debate. We didn't always need CPD to monitor American democracy. As a manager of President Rawlings' 1984 re-election campaign, I was part of the last debate negotiation between two presidential campaigns. Together with the Mondale campaign, we quickly determined the format, timing, and location of the 1984 debates, and they worked without a hitch. A presidential election should return to that simpler, more effective model. It would get rid of bureaucratic delay and protect candidates, Democrat and Republican, from moderate bias, which we are seeing today. At a time when Joe Biden continues to hide, Americans don't need a bureaucratic entity condoning his cowardice. What they need is for President Trump and his opponent to face off mano a mano, and that's by Ed Rollins, who serves as chairman of the pro-Trump Good American Political Action Committee. Now, interestingly enough, I don't know all that much about the Commission on Presidential Debates. Just a quick glance at its overview, we see that and let me put it up on share here so you can see it as well. It is a private, nonpartisan 501c3 organization, and as such, it is eligible under federal law to serve as a debate sponsor. The CPD's primary mission is to ensure, for the benefit of the American electorate, that general election debates are held every 4 years between and among the leading candidates for the offices of President and Vice President of the United States. It's supposed to be an independent organization, not controlled by any party or outside organization, and does not endorse, support, or oppose political candidates or parties. Well, if that's the case, then why is it since 1992 that there have only been the Republican and Democrat candidates and not the third party candidates? You know, that's a real head scratcher there. And let's see what else is on here. I mean, some of it just doesn't make any sense. You know, deadline to apply for a credential had passed, and here we have the first debate, 2 weeks, Case Western Reserve University and Cleveland Clinic. That's the one that Chris Wallace is going to moderate. And as a matter of fact, I don't see any of the other Or I don't see any moderators listed, at least on here, but let's see just what, let's see if they're on the websites. Uh-huh. Yeah, Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page selected as vice presidential debate moderator. That'll be between Pence and Harris. And that'll take place at the University of Utah in Kingsbury Hall. And the second presidential debate will be on Thursday, October 15. Interestingly enough, which is interesting because it's going to take place opposite the NFL, as well the third debate on the 22nd at Belmont University. And let's see what they, doesn't say what who the moderator is going to be there, but I had found them in another video, and well, let's do. I'll quickly pull that up while I'm here. Give me a minute, folks. This from 270 to win.com, who have where they have the debate moderators all situated and named. Like I said, we have Chris Wallace as a moderator for the presidential debate in Cleveland. He works for Fox. Susan Page of USA Today is doing the vice presidential debate on October 7th at the University of Utah. Steve Scully from C-SPAN is doing the third debate, the second presidential debate at the Adrienne Arsht Center in Miami. And Kristen Walker of NBC is doing the third presidential debate at Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee. And it says that all debates run without commercial breaks from 9 o'clock until 10:30 p.m. Eastern. So, and each debate will have a single moderator. So it should be rather interesting. And on debates.org, we have the formats, which first debate will be divided into 6 segments of approximately 15 minutes, each on major topics to be selected by the moderator and announced at least 1 week before the debate. Moderator will open each segment with a question. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. Candidates will then have an opportunity to respond to each other, and the moderator will use a balance of the time in the segment for a deeper discussion of the topic. Vice presidential debate will be 9 segments, 10 minutes each. With the same format, moderator asks an opening question. Each candidate have 2 minutes to respond, and then the moderator will use a balance of the time for a deeper discussion. Second presidential debate will take the form of a town hall meeting in which the questions will be posed by citizens from the South Florida area. Candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and then there'll be an additional minute for the moderator to facilitate further discussion. And the participants will be uncommitted voters selected under the supervision of a senior scientist from Gallup. And the third presidential debate format will be identical to the first one, which is 6 segments, approximately 15 minutes each, on major topics selected by the moderator, who will open the segment with a question, after which each debater will have 2 minutes to respond. Candidates will then have an opportunity to respond to each other, and then the moderator will use the balance of the time for a segment in the segment for a deeper discussion of the topic. And this year's debate will build on the successful 2012 and 2016 debate formats, which introduced longer segments, allowing the candidates to focus on critical issues. So, like I said, we're just under 7 weeks out from the election, 2 weeks out from the first presidential debate. So things will be interesting as both campaigns are ratcheting up their their campaigns for the election and in hopes of getting the White House and being inaugurated in January 2021. Picking up on the topic of debates from yesterday, Joe Rogan, a podcaster and celebrity, had even offered to host a debate. This article coming from legalinsurrection.com and from Michael Chance over there. Joe Rogan offers to moderate 4-hour Trump-Biden debate. Trump agrees. Just the two candidates, cameras, and their vision of how to move this country forward. A few days ago, Joe Rogan did his highly watched podcast with guest Tim Kennedy, a veteran, martial arts fighter, and TV host. At one point, Kennedy asked Rogan if he would consider using his podcast to moderate a long-form debate between President Trump and Joe Biden. Rogan added a few reasonable conditions, but said he would, quote-unquote, 100% do it. Rogan said he would want it to last for hours with only the three of them in the room, and be live streamed so no one could edit it. Morgan Chalfant reported at The Hill, Trump says he's interested in a debate hosted by Joe Rogan. President Trump on Monday signaled he would participate in a 4-hour debate with Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden, moderated by Joe Rogan, despite such a format being likely impossible. Trump shared his tweet from Tim Kennedy, a retired mixed martial artist, who wrote that Rogan, a comedian and mixed martial arts color commentator, offered during his podcast to moderate a 4-hour debate between Trump and Biden without a live audience. Just the two candidates, cameras, and their vision of how to move this country forward. Who wants this? Hashtag debates, hashtag election 2020, Kennedy tweeted. Tim Kennedy announced the news on Twitter. On my podcast with Joe Rogan, he offered to moderate a debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It would be 4 hours with no live audience, just the two candidates, cameras, and their vision of how to move this country forward. Who wants this? Hashtag debates, hashtag election 2020, Tim Kennedy at Tim Kennedy MMA. Shortly after that, Trump responded saying he would do it. I do. And there's a link to the and here's a link to what Tim Kennedy had said, along with some comments. And there's a video in the article, which I will leave in the description below, of Rogan and Kennedy having the discussion. Video is queued to start at the 2-hour 40-second mark. Just press play. Michael Chance says that this would be big, and before you laugh it off, remember that Bernie Sanders appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast, and it was one of his most watched episodes. This would be the most watched episode, the most watched debate in history. And here are a few more reactions. Honestly, I haven't seen a single reason from either side of the aisle why Joe Rogan debate wouldn't be a more meaningful and worthwhile way for voters to see who these two candidates really are and what they stand for. Old network format just turns into a talking points contest. That's from Buck Sexton. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted out, I would love to see this. Let's make it happen. And Ian Miles Chong said the Trump-Biden 4-hour debate hosted by Joe Rogan is going to be the best thing ever televised in history if it happens. Benny Johnson formerly of Independent Journal Review. This will be the greatest debate of the election. Rogan is pretty far to the left politically, yet many people on the right trust him to be more impartial than the media. Now, what does that tell you? I admit that I've not listened to Joe Rogan's podcast. However, that would be one podcast that I would definitely listen to. I mean, if anything, because it's a political debate, and even though the article says that Rogan is politically left, it might could be interesting. I mean, you know, just have someone not of the mainstream news media, CBS, NBC, ABC, none of the established media involved in this. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting. Leave me your comment. Leave me your response and thoughts in the comments section below. And like I said, I will link this in the description along with the other articles that I am featuring this week. And I'll look forward to the next one. The news media of today is not the news media of Dan Rather, Walter Cronkite, David Brinkley, or others back in the late 60s up until about 1980. This coming from townhall.com and Victor David Hansen. It's entitled "The News as We Once Knew It Is Dead." In 2017, the liberal Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard University found that 93% of CNN's coverage of the Trump administration was negative. The center found similarly negative Trump coverage at other major news outlets. The election year 2020 has only accelerated that asymmetrical bias to the point that major newspapers and network and cable news organizations are now fused with the Joe Biden campaign. Sometimes stories are covered only in terms of political agendas. Take COVID-19. The media assure us that the Trump administration's handling of the pandemic has been a disaster, but their conclusions are not supported by any evidence. In the United States, the coronavirus death per million people is similar to or lower than most major European countries except Germany. When the virus was at its worst, before the partisan campaign of this election year heated up, the governors in our four largest states had only compliments for the Trump administration. Democrats Andrew Cuomo of New York and Gavin Newsom of California, and Republicans Greg Abbott of Texas and Ron DeSantis of Florida effusively praised the administration's cooperation with their own frontline efforts. The most recent conclusions of impartial heads of federal agencies responsible for coordinating national and state policies are about the same. Dr. Deborah Birx, advisor to both the Obama and Trump administrations on responses to infectious diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former head of the Food and Drug Administration, have not faulted the Trump administration's overall COVID-19 response. They attribute any shortcomings to initial global ignorance about the origins and nature of the pandemic, incompetence at the World Health Organization, or the initial inability of bureaucracies to produce easily available and reliable test kits. Prominent progressive Trump critics such as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi criticized the necessary Trump travel ban, yet Pelosi told people there was no reason to cancel planned travel to San Francisco's Chinatown. However, the real warping of the news is not just a matter of slanting coverage, but deliberately not covering the news at all. In the last 2 weeks, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has achieved the most stunning breakthroughs in Middle Eastern diplomacy in over half a century. Countries once hostile to Israel such as the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, now formally recognize it. Other Arab nations may soon follow. Ancient existential enemies Kosovo and Syria also agreed to normalize their relationship with Israel by signing economic agreements. Yet none of these historic events could have drawn such media attention. All of them would have been canonized were they achievements of the Obama administration. In 2017, the media suggested that Trump's plans to get out of the Iran nuclear deal and Paris Climate Accord, to confront Chinese mercantilism, to forge new alliances between Israel and moderate Arab regimes, to isolate and ascend Iran, to close the southern border to illegal immigration, to jawbone NATO alliance members into honoring their defense expenditure commitments, and to destroy ISIS and weaken Hezbollah were all impossible, counterproductive, or sheer madness. And now, an embargoed and bankrupt Iran is teetering on the brink. Its international terrorist appendages, including Hezbollah, are broke. China is being ostracized by much of the world. The U.S. has cut off its carbon emissions, often at a rate superior to those nations still adhering to the Paris Climate Accord targets. Cross-border illegal immigration has been reduced, according to many metrics. ISIS was bombed into near dissolution. Moderate regimes in the Mideast are ascendant. Radical cliques like Hamas and Al-Qaeda are not. More NATO members are meeting their commitments. The alliance's aggregate defensive investments are way up. Is any of that considered news? Not really. Instead, every 3 or 4 days, the public is fed a series of fantasy quote-unquote bombshells, much like the daily hysterias of the Robert Mueller investigation. Enter alleged collusion between Trump team and Russia, a 2-year media hype dud. In recent weeks, the media warned us that Trump was dismantling the post office to disrupt mail-in vote balloting. Trump, we're told, has decided never to concede his share loss in November and might have to be forcibly removed, perhaps by the military. We read that Trump defiled the memory of fallen American soldiers in cemetery abroad. We lecture that Trump supposedly never took COVID-19 seriously. All of these stories were either demonstrably untrue, were supported only by anonymous sources, or were the sensationalism of authors hawking books. Yet, such concocted melodramas will continue each week up to Election Day, while fundamental geostrategic shifts abroad, brought about by American diplomacy, will by intent go unnoticed. The news as we once understood it is dead. It has been replaced by the unnews, a political narrative created by partisans who believe the noble ends of destroying Trump justify any biased means necessary, including destroying their own reputation and craft. Now, what's interesting about this is Andrew Breitbart had pretty much said the same thing in a video clip which I played a while back. He said that the new media is taking over where the old media failed. And we're seeing that right now. Victor David Hanson just himself even alluded that the old media is dead when he said that the news as we once understood it is dead and being replaced by the unnews, which is a political narrative. Andrew Breitbart was right on this back in 2011, and to this day he has always been right about it. That's why we are the news now. You know, we have to hold the media accountable as much as the politicians. So let's do what we can to do such. The election is in 46 more days, and yet there is a fight already brewing. Let's go right to the article. This from the Washington Free Beacon. It's by Kevin Daly and Lee Anderson titled The Legal Fight for the Presidential Election Has Already Started. Low-notice court battles that could decide the presidential election have been underway for months in almost every swing state. Democrats are pressing courts for lenient guidelines and remote alternatives to in-person voting, while Republicans defend conventional rules and methods. Expanding voting options is thought to favor the Democrats, even as the GOP expects to carry the in-person vote on Election Day. The abrupt changes and continued uncertainty could confuse voters and aggravate growing doubts about the election's legitimacy, with hundreds of thousands of ballots at stake. Officials in Ohio and Pennsylvania are mired in disputes over efforts to install drop boxes for voters anxious about visiting polling precincts. Meanwhile, Republican and Democrat campaign arms have sparred over so-called ballot harvesting rules in Michigan, Minnesota, and Nevada. The public health crisis and contested Republican claims about voter fraud loom large over the controversies. In Ohio, a fast-moving contest over drop box voting has been eclipsed by a bitter public feud between state court judges and the GOP. On Tuesday, Judge Richard Fry ruled that Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, a Republican, had no basis for limiting absentee ballot drop boxes to one per county. The state GOP announced the ruling and accused Fry, an elected Democrat, of partisanship and bad faith. That drew a rebuke from Ohio's Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. Every one of Ohio's 722 judges, 800 magistrates, and numerous active retired judges should be greatly concerned and voice their dismay at the irresponsible Republican Party allegation that politics control the judge's decision, O'Connor said. This is a blatant and unfounded attack on the independence of the Ohio judiciary. In neighboring Pennsylvania, the Trump campaign is challenging guidelines that allow for dozens of ballot drop boxes across the state. Some 20 counties, including heavily Democrat Allegheny County and Philadelphia counties, authorize remote ballot drop-off locations. The campaign filed a legal challenge before a federal judge in Pittsburgh, saying state law only authorizes the return of absentee ballots to a county board of elections offices, or to a county boards of elections office. Pennsylvania Democrats are trying to resolve the controversy in state court. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed on September 1 to invoke extraordinary authority to resolve electoral disputes. In turn, the federal judge in Pittsburgh put the Trump suit on hold, since federal courts generally decline to resolve state law issues while state court proceedings are ongoing. The Trump campaign called the Democrat maneuver an obvious bid to shop for a favorable form, quote-unquote. Democrat appointees have a 5-2 advantage on the state Supreme Court. Judges also try to avoid last-minute changes to election rules, since late adjustments can confuse voters or create chaos for administrators. That practice, called the Purcell Principle, played a decisive role in an April Supreme Court case involving postmarking rules for absentee ballots in Wisconsin. A few days before the balloting, a federal judge allowed voters in the state's April 7 election to submit absentee ballots as late as April 13, even if they were postmarked after Election Day. The High Court's conservative majority stopped that accommodation and faulted the district judge for what they called an improper last-minute change. This court has repeatedly emphasized that lower federal courts should ordinarily alter the election rules on the eve of an election, the court's decision reads. Now, the Trump campaign has invoked the potential for confusion in its attacks on absentee ballot collection operations. Some states allow voters to turn in absentee ballots via third parties, which Republicans derisively call ballot harvesting, quote-unquote. Many red states have banned the practice, though Democrats say it helps ensure the infirm or those with spotty postal service such as residents on Indian reservations, can participate in elections. The left wants a system where every person, alive or dead, registered or not, is automatically mailed a ballot, where Democrat operatives go living room to living room, in the area of COVID no less, intimidating voters, collecting their ballots, and ensuring there is no secret ballot. Trump campaign spokesperson Thea McDonald told the Washington Free Beacon, these shady operatives then cherry-pick which ballots they deliver, ultimately stacking the deck in their favor. Now, Democrats have challenged ballot harvesting bans across the country. They say such restrictions are redundant because of misconduct Republicans fear is already covered by laws that criminalize vote buying or ballot tampering. They also attack ballot collection limits on free speech grounds. In a Michigan lawsuit, Democrats argue the state's ban has a chilling effect on efforts to educate voters. Since campaign voters or friendly neighbors who offer help returning absentee ballots could face criminal charges. The organizing ban involves the direct regulation of communication and political association among private parties advocating for a particular change. Democrats wrote in court documents. Democrats attacked a similar law in Minnesota, which caps at 3 the number of ballots one person can deliver for the voters. Hold on a minute. Now, votes are reversed in Nevada, where the Democrat-controlled state house passed emergency legislation to permit third-party collection in August. The Trump campaign intervened in a lawsuit on August 4 that asks a court to put the law on hold. Nevada Secretary of State, a Republican, also asked for an emergency regulation requiring any person returning 10 or more ballots to report to election offices and disclose any association with interest groups or campaign or organizations. Republicans prevailed in the ballot harvesting disputes in Michigan and Minnesota, and a decision in the Nevada case is pending before Las Vegas federal court. Now, it's things like this that kind of turn me off to politics, but at the same time, it's definitely needed, especially or not needed, but definitely needs to be paid attention to, especially with an election as close as this might be, depending on the absentee ballots and other things. I mean, things are. When I say things are interesting, this is what I mean. I mean, here we are, just 47 days away from the election, and everything is coming out, and basically the brown stuff's about to hit the whirlybird. And that's going to do it for the news for this week. I am Mick Bulow. Again, if you like what you watch, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Also subscribe and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell an enemy or two even. And I will be back next week. Until next time, peace.